that the public wasn't really upset with Washington or what the parties were doing, they were just upset with the other party. So what we've essentially seen is that in 2005, the Republicans, which had control of everything, went toward passing policies that were in favor of their base. Then the Democrats, when they got control in 2008, moved to a whole bunch of policies that were in favor of their base. And the American public went, hello, we're not really voting for you, we're voting against the other side.
So that brings us to today.
So that brings us to today.
And you said, in a sense, the vote was a pox on both their houses. It wasn't
Absolutely.
really a Republican victory. It was, again, sort of voting against both parties in a way.
Yes.
So what happens now? We have the Trump administration, and how does it move forward on domestic issues?
Right.
What do you see as a possibility for this administration?
Well, I mean, and this is where I think what's so interesting is that there is the possibility right now, because both parties have been cast out in very kind of inglorious fashions over the last decade, that perhaps both parties can in fact learn that the problem isn't just the other side, the problem is also within their own houses, and that maybe there's an opportunity to work together.
We've heard that so many times.
We have.
I'm a little cynical. I mean, I'd like to believe that you're correct, but what stars do you see that would align, that would allow that to work together?
I mean, I think the biggest alignment of stars is actually that I would argue that Paul Ryan is, in fact, even if you disagree with him on a whole host of issues, he is somebody who is a policy wonk, and he would much prefer to be a workhorse than a show horse. So that's a good sign. The other side of it is that Chuck Schumer, who is now essentially going to be the minority leader in the Senate, is a deal maker. And he is also somebody who's going to want to see things get done, because 2018 doesn't set up any better for the Democrats if they obstruct than essentially this year did for them. So I think one of the other issues is that both parties, since really Newt Gingrich won back Congress in 1994, they believed that obstruction would help them win back the majority. And the truth of the matter is, it has helped. They were able to basically obstruct. If you don't believe that the Democrats didn't obstruct in 2007 and 8 when they were in control of Congress and George W. Bush was in the White House, then you weren't really paying attention.
It's a bipartisan.
It's a bipartisan problem. Both of them believe this is how they win the majority, how they get all of it. But the thing is that now both parties have been burned by it. And the interesting part about both parties being burned by it is I do think they also realize that if they don't start producing some results, there's never going to be even a modicum of trust to in fact make your claims and win again.
So where do you see the policies that will be bipartisan? You say, okay, there are some stars that are aligned so that people will work together. What are they most likely to work together on, generally, and then let's turn to education a little bit.
So I think generally there is an opportunity, which a lot of people have talked about, on the infrastructure bill. I mean, I think that's where everyone sees that the Republicans would like to do sort of, a reduction in corporate tax rates, and with that there would be a sort of one-time repatriation of dollars that are sitting overseas, and out of that would come about $240 billion is the estimate, which then essentially, certainly the Democrats, some Republicans, but definitely Donald Trump, would like to see spent on infrastructure. So there is an opportunity for something to move if essentially the House can be convinced that spending is not a bad thing. And they might be able to be convinced of that if they can reduce the corporate tax rates at the same time.
All right, so we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah.
What about education? We have a very interesting dynamic set up with the new education secretary. What is the significance of her pick, do you think, and where do you see education going under the Trump administration?
Well, let me just say, this is where Trump is actually very interesting.
As a
Republican, yes. I mean, one of the things you might remember is back in one of the early debates, he was asked, and this was the primary debates, he was in fact asked, what do you think are the top 3 priorities for the president? And his first one was security and defense, which makes complete sense. That's what you would expect nearly all presidents to say as their first pick. His second pick was actually education, and his third was healthcare. Now, I don't know any other Republican who would have assumed that the president should be doing healthcare and education at the federal level. We're just saying.
Well, he has also said that
Right.
he believes the state should be in charge of it.
And he does.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that he actually even puts it on his priority list. Many other Republicans would have argued that essentially it was something to do with the economy or something to do with setting the market, something to do with tax rates. I mean, it's very strange that
putting it on the list. I mean, not that you're in his head, I know, but I'm just wondering
Sure.
if you have any idea about that.
I think what the interesting part is, what this actually suggests is, at some level, I think Donald Trump is much more interested and has always been more interested in being, if you will, a more domestic president than a foreign policy president. I don't think he necessarily realizes that presidents, kind of by virtue of the Constitution, are much more engaged in foreign policy on a daily basis than our states, who do actually a huge portion of what we call police powers within political science. But it's education, welfare, and the health of its citizens. So it is interesting that Donald Trump somehow sort of thinks that being president means you get to be governor for the country. You know, and
How successful is he gonna be at that? I mean,
Well-
like in the area of education, he's talked about, you know, a $20 billion program for vouchers and school choice. He's clearly picked an education secretary who's very much believes in the marketplace, driving school
Absolutely.
change. Do you think they're gonna be able to push forward that vision in any major way?
You know, I'm not sure. I mean, this is where we will see sort of whether interest and desire kind of, you know, is able to trump, not to use that phrase, but able to trump essentially institutions and inertia. I mean, I do think we are in a very unique moment. It's not unique in our history, but it is unique in modern times. I would also argue, though, that George W. Bush, he expected to be the governor of the country. I don't think he ever expected to be a war president. 9/11 completely changed his agenda and also changed the power structure within the White House. Dick Cheney was able to take on much more of sort of a lead role after 9/11 than I think he would have ever been had 9/11 not occurred. So this is where presidents never really get the presidency they want. Life and events and the world changes too much. But I do think if Donald Trump is able to essentially be more of a governor for the country and able to leave sort of more of the foreign policy to the generals, we'll see, then I think there could be some movement in education that may not be such a bad thing, right? I think when I say that, what I mean is there may be some new energy and focus and interest in education that there hasn't been really since we have been at war.
I'm gonna open it up for questions in 1 second after I have one. So if you have a question, feel free to line up at the microphone.